What is the most messed up thing you have ever done? First story. My grandmother moved in with us when I was a teenager and started to go senile. Our relationship quickly soured. Living with her was different from sending her letters and making phone calls. It wasn't her fault. You change when you start to lose your mind. But honest to goodness, I couldn't stand her. Everything was my fault. Every single thing she misplaced, I stole. I must have stolen it. She couldn't accept that she just couldn't remember where she was putting things. The worst time, she had a meltdown over photos she'd misplaced and had my parents search my room while I shouted that I never touched them. I was a teenager. Why would I want her photos of the garden? I could just go outside if I wanted to see it. Goddamn. One night, I woke up because she was shouting for me in that nasally trill she always had that I would grown to hate because of her constant theft accusations. Just my name, over and over. She was in the bathroom across the hall from my room. I didn't know what time it was. I figured it was early because she always got up at like 5 a.m. I figured she was shouting for me because she misplaced something again, and was happily accusing me of going into her private bathroom that I never went near and taking it. So I thought some very angry choice words at her, and pretended I didn't hear her. She called for me for 30 or so more minutes until it finally woke up my mom. I figured there, now mom can deal with you and I can sleep. Well, turns out her kidneys had shut down acutely. She was vomiting and excreting blood that whole time, yelling for me not to tell me I was a little thief again, but because she needed help. She was 85.30 at 30 minutes probably didn't make a difference. But she died a few days later, and while I know it wasn't my fault, her extended suffering was. I'm sorry, Grandma. Story number 2. I'm a recovered heroin addict, 9 years sober, and I have a lot of stories of how much of a crap person I used to be. I really can't gauge what my worst moment would be, but I can post a story or two definitely. One day, I was flat broke and on my last bag of dope. My neighborhood pharmacist just recently was arrested for a DUI. Brainstorming, I came up with an idea to try and get some pills at the ER. I still had med insurance at the moment, so I thought this was my best option. My buddy came by and we were hanging out outside smoking a cigarette and trying to figure out how to get hurt. Just enough to get some pills, but not enough to actually have permanent repercussions. There was this damn big cinder block beside my garage, and I decided to drop it on my foot in hopes of just breaking a toe at most. I stood outside on the concrete patio for about 5 minutes with the cinder block trying to hype myself up enough to drop it on my foot. I couldn't do it, psyched myself out too much. I told my friend that he would have to do it for me, and he said okay. He held it about waist high and dropped it on my foot. I knew it wasn't enough damage, so I told him that he needed to put it up higher and drop it again, to which he did. So go to the hospital, tell them that I was carrying boxes downstairs to the basement, and drop them when I slipped on the bottom step. So I go back, get x-rays, and I am in the waiting room. Doctor comes in and tells me that I've torn numerous ligaments in my foot, and probably would hurt less if I had just broke my foot. Hearing this, I was excited, thinking yes, I just scored. I didn't care about the pain at the moment, just happy that I just potentially scored. They release me, and hand me a script. They wrote me a script for ibuprofen 800 mg, defeat. Third story. Was night manager at fast food establishment during college. There was a bitter prank rivalry between our establishment and the Subway next to us. After months of prank escalation, I crammed a rotting hamburger patty in the handle of the Subway manager's trunk lid so he went knuckle deep in rotting burger when he went home. That was the end of the prank war, and I've never forgiven myself for crossing the red line. Fourth story. I'm gonna rat my little sister out. During our parents' divorce and custody battle, we were forced to sit in on family counseling sessions. I was 12 and she was 8. We thought my mom was acting funny and might have been banging the counselor on the side for her own personal testimonial interests. Still not confirmed. So we were mad because we loved our mom and our dad. It seemed like the counselor favored our mom over our dad, and it got rough sometimes watching him become outed by the only two adult forces who didn't love him in this world. Anyway, my little sister and I were left alone in his office, and she decided she was gonna take a crap in his little trash can to assert dominance. It was asserted. We never went back. Fifth story. This was an embarrassing one that I hope no one ever finds out. One night a few years ago, my boyfriend and his family, get Chinese food from our favorite little place. For some reason this night it doesn't sit well with me. An hour after eating I get that intensely sick feeling, like you have to pop so bad that you want to throw up. Whatever, I go upstairs and destroy the bathroom. It's important to note, there's 2 bathrooms upstairs and none downstairs, which is like a little apartment where my boyfriend and I stay. After I'm sure my bowels are empty, I go back down to lay in bed. Thought I could nap it off. Nah, about 30 seconds after laying down I get the urge to go again. I run upstairs and to my horror, both bathrooms are occupied. His sister is refusing to get out of the shower even though it's an emergency, and his dad is blowing up the other toilet, presumably suffering a similar fate to mine. I begrudgingly go sit in bed and contemplate my options as the bubbling in my gut grows worse. Bust down the bathroom door and traumatize his sister? Make the 30-minute drive home? No, it was urgent. I even thought about craping my pants, against my will, and dealing with the embarrassment. God, I don't want to subject my future in-laws to that. I begrudgingly realize my only option is to go outside like nature intended. Their yard is very open and it was a super bright moonlit night, so there was no place to do it without feeling super exposed, except for under the trampoline. My thought process was, no one has used the trampoline for years, and it's out of sight/walking range so no one could accidentally step in it. Great. I do my business, get soaked in the process. It was slightly raining and the trampoline was pouring water on me. Clean up with napkins and wet wipes. Come inside. Immediately throw up in the trash can from the shock, embarrassment, anxiety, sickness. Clean that up and immediately go to bed. Everything was fine for a few days, until my boyfriend's dad lightheartedly tells me how he was late for work that morning. The dog had rolled in some crap and he had to get a bath. I felt like throwing up all over again, but thankfully everyone just suspected it was some type of animal pop. Story number 6. Surgical tech here. One of my patients was at the very tail end of pregnancy, but the baby wound up dying. She was in denial and refused care, and carried the dead baby for almost a month. I was on the team to get her a C-section when she finally came to get it out. The baby's skin was like wet paper, any pressure anywhere caused it to tear. The muscles underneath had started to rot. The bones were mostly broken down to the point of providing no structure, so it moved like a baby-shaped water balloon. Face looked like something from a horror movie. Smell was easily the worst I've experienced. Room was eerie silent, including the mother who was awake, normal for C-sections. Been a surgical tech for over 6 years, and that was by far the most messed up thing I've ever seen or done. That case was almost 4 years ago, and still pops into my mind regularly. 7th story. My hometown is generally pretty middle class to poor. There's a bunch of rich people that live in the woods, and one of them had a kid that went to our high school and bullied the heck out of the kids that weren't as wealthy. That dude grew up and bought a Camaro last summer, and removed the muffler so it would be the loudest freaking thing in town. On New Year's Eve of 2021 he decided to ruin a town tradition and lap the town common with it during the tree lighting ceremony, while people were caroling and giving thanks. Summer of last year, me and a friend decided it was time to get revenge because nobody wanted to do anything about it. My friend's dad owned a junkyard and they recently got an old train horn from a busted diesel that ended up there. We spent a good week getting it set up in the back of his work truck and decided to wait on it for a little while. A month or so later, we found out he was having a party of some kind with other rich folks in his family, but we didn't know what it was about, so we carefully parked outside his house on the opposite side of his fence. Right as it was starting, we blasted the train horn and peeled out before anyone knew what happened. News got out later and we found out the party we bombed was actually a wake for his late grandfather. Next story. The day before I stopped drinking alcohol altogether, I was in a really dark place for a number of reasons, and I was absolutely using alcohol as a crutch. One of the reasons why I was in such a bad place, emotionally, was because my cousin was in decline due to glioblastoma. I was actively seeing this person, that I loved dearly, lose his sense of self and ability to understand conversations and situations. And he was young, just turned 50. There was a lot of light in the beginning, but considering that glioblastoma is effectively a stage-less brain cancer, it was almost guaranteed he would lose the battle. The day that I stopped drinking altogether was the day that I was supposed to drive him to a research institute for his monthly treatment and check-in. It was the only time I was asked to take on that level of responsibility, as his wife would normally take him. I helped in a bunch of different ways, like hanging out with him when he'd otherwise be alone, but this appointment was pretty big. I depressedly drank myself into a stupor the night before and missed our meetup time. I'd said that I'd be there no matter what, and I wasn't. The appointment happened, and he reassured me everything was okay as he knew the battle was over anyway. But I will never forgive myself for that. Even typing this out makes me feel like the biggest piece of crap. I wish I was sober then. Next story. I don't know if it's that messed up, but it's something that follows me around and that I regret deeply. When I was in my late teens, I worked for a care company that went into people's homes to support them, mostly the elderly. I met a lot of sweet, interesting, and sometimes pretty mean people, but my favorite was Joyce. I was a pretty messed up kid with a crap home life and Joyce was well into her 80s, but I dunno, we just clicked. She was a genuinely cool person to spend time with, a friend. I'd start to go round to hers in my breaks rather than just sit in my car, and her voice would light up through the buzzer when she knew it was me. I'd make her sandwiches and cups of tea and we'd smoke cheap cigarettes, and she'd tell me stories about her late husband building their home, and how she was a dressmaker who made dresses on the side for trans women, or men who just wanted to wear dresses because, in her words, Who cares if you're not hurting anyone? She was awesome. She was often my last visit of the night, so I'd just clock off when done then stay late to do her hair. Joyce had daughters who lived close by but rarely visited. I remember her saying it was nice of them to drop off some Christmas dinner in Tupperware one time, so that it could be heated up in the microwave. And my only thought was, why wasn't she sat at your table? There was also another carer I'd never met but who she spoke highly of. It broke her heart when she found out he'd been stealing from her. Joyce would ask me that if I was ever to quit the job that I would tell her first. I wouldn't just leave her. I'd say of course, and if I do, I'll come and see you anyway. But I never did. I never saw her again. One night into a work shift, something happened and I was rushed into hospital and had to abandon my shift. I managed to notify work in time, but I was in hospital for a while, and then unable to work for months. I never saw Joyce again, and in her eyes I abandoned her, and I guess I did in a way. I thought about her lots and about going up to visit, but there was always something. I was recovering, my boyfriend was abusive. Then eventually, will she recognize me? It'll be weird now. It's been too long. What if she's passed? That was 12 years ago, and it still gnaws at me from time to time. I saw a lot of super upsetting things and spent time with a lot of forgotten people. Call your grandparents your parents if you can. Next story. One time, a girl I had minimal interest in, but had mutual shared friends with, had sent me a text basically saying, I have feelings for you and I'd like to explore where that takes us. I then typed up a message to my good friend saying, please kill me now. I think she wants a relationship. Keep in mind, this girl was nice and all, but just wasn't my type. I'm also a people pleaser, so the thought of having to turn down someone makes me uncomfortable, and I dreaded having to tell her I wasn't interested. I've been turned down before. It sucks. I don't want to do that to someone else. I did not mean to please kill me now as a knock on her as a person, but as I don't want to be in this situation. You can probably guess what happened though. Yep, I sent a please kill me now text to the girl. After immediately realizing what I did and thinking for about 30 seconds how I could possibly talk my way out of not sounding like the biggest jerk in the entire world, I realized that there was no good way to spin that. I decided to just try my best to explain to her that it wasn't meant to be mean and blah blah blah. I also said that she didn't deserve that blah blah blah. Didn't matter. I still cringe about it to this day. Next story. I had something similar where I was walking home from summer band practice and had explosive diarrhea really badly. Middle of the summer in Texas, most bushes were either cacti or dead, and I was walking through a neighborhood. Long story short, there was this tiny house, one of them plastic houses that little kids play in. I went in there, closed the door, squatted down and took a crap in the corner. I sometimes wonder if the family tried to guess if a wild animal went in their little girl's playhouse and took a dump. Story number 12. I woke up from a blackout drunk in a bathroom of a house I've never been in before. It was a model home a few miles from my apartment at the time. I staggered back home sometime around 4 a.m. Oh, it was also my birthday and I was alone those few days. Let's get to the next story. I stole a laptop from my old job. It was a brand new MacBook that they ordered one too many of and just sat in a closet for the 3 years I worked for this huge corporation. I was IT, so I knew how and had the ability to wipe it from all the records. I feel kinda bad about it cause it's worth a lot, so a felony theft, but they really didn't even know it existed and I needed a computer. I chalk it up to all the unpaid OT I worked to make me feel better. I could only hit 40 by contract and some jobs required more than that per week. Let's get to the next story. This is a story of revenge. I've never told it before. It's messed up, but I still think I was justified. Many years ago I lived in Japan, where the English school business is a big business. A good friend of mine had put years of work into developing his own curriculum. I was his head teacher and helped develop several original, educational textbooks for kids. He was ready to launch his school, but he needed financial backing because trying to incorporate in Japan as a foreigner is close to impossible. He found a local businessman to help finance the operation. My friend put down $50,000 and the local businessman put down $51,000, giving him controlling share. I'm not sure exactly what happened. All I know is that the local businessman basically pulled out at the last minute and stole the $50,000 from my friend, and there was nothing my friend could do. This local businessman then decided to open up the school entirely on his own and cut my friend out using the material I had designed. This local businessman had never met me and didn't know that I existed, so my friend suggested that I reply to his advertisement in the newspaper, looking for a head teacher, and try to get hired so we could bring the school down from the inside. I did, and I was hired as the head teacher and was put in charge of setting up all the classrooms, getting all the supplementary books, all of the toys, games, setting up the class schedules, and even setting up all the computers and software needed to run the business. Literally everything. I spent 3 months preparing to launch the school, building the curriculum, printing flyers, talking to parents of the kids and signing them up for classes, the whole 9 yards. But 2 days before the school was set to open, I got my revenge. I threw all the computers into the garbage bin, which was collected the next day, and changed all the passwords for all the cloud services. I then threw out my cell phone and disappeared. Because this guy was sketchy, he had always wanted to pay me in cash, so he didn't have my bank information, didn't have my actual mailing address, and I gave him a fake one to start. So when I disappeared, he literally had no way to know who I was or how to find me. I found out through the grapevine later that this wound up costing that local businessman several $100,000, as he needed to pull cash from his other businesses to refinance this one and basically start from scratch. He missed the beginning of the school year, and all of the parents that he had contracted with were mad and canceled, and he was never able to recoup them as clients. Basically, I cost him an entire year. I don't regret it for a second, because this guy stole $50,000 from my friend, and basically took advantage of some young entrepreneurs who were just trying to get their business started. He got what he deserved, and I now have a backstory as a corporate saboteur. Story number 15. 8th grade. It was the last week of school and we had to turn in our end of the year history assignment. Now I was very lazy with school stuff but would also get grounded if I got bad grades. I procrastinated so bad to the point there wasn't really a way out of it. One day in class, our teacher tells us he has a stack of history projects that were turned in that didn't have a name on them. I get a light bulb. I go over to the stack and find a project on Civil War era weaponry like cannons and stuff. Funny thing was, it actually did have a name on it. It was just written in pencil on black paper and hard to see. I erased the name, put my name on it and turned it in. Never got caught. Sorry, Haley. Next story. My buddy and I were around 8, and we were being watched by a neighbor. We somehow got our hands on several boxes of matchbooks, so we started building rockets out of aluminum foil filled with match heads. When we didn't have enough to build any more rockets, we each took the last few packs of matches and started flinging them at each other. You know, ripping off the match head and then firing it off of the striker on the matchbook cover. We were chasing each other around the yard and got near another neighbor's house. They had one of those roll-up wooden reed sunscreens, the ones they now make out of plastic. A match got wedged between the reeds and started burning. Before we knew it, it was 1 inch around, 3 inches around, 6 inches around, and it wouldn't go out. Pretty soon the screen was burning from the bottom up, and soon the house. We ran and got a garden hose and somehow managed to extinguish it with only half the screen burned. We then went back in the house where we were supposed to be being watched and turned on the TV until the fire department showed up. Being 8, we tried to deny it until they pointed out our wet pant legs and the ashes still on our shoes. I'll be asked, so we got out of it. The neighbor did not press charges, but my dad paid for the repairs and pressed with a belt, as it was back in the day. I don't backjudge him in 2023, and I have to admit that the punishment and the fact that we could have burned somebody's house down sharpened my sense of what was right and wrong, and that my actions could have impact on other people. Hey, thanks for subscribing and liking, it really means a lot to me. While you are here, feel free to hop on over to the last video. See you there. Ronnie.